All right. Uh, it occurred to me after I flipped over my one page of notes and realized I had more notes on the back. The uh, you know the I kind of left a piece off of the attributional theory, uh, and when you do the reading, you'll kind of run into it. But you know the attributions kind of fall into uh, two categories. They're kind of polar differences. You can attribute people's behaviors, the causes of their behaviors, or the causes of whatever it is they did, to their disposition or their personality, or things like that, character flaws, whatever. Or you can, at the other end of the spectrum, you can attribute them to uh, situational differences. And being once again human, we are driven toward thinking of them as personality driven or dispositionally driven, when it's just as likely they are situationally driven. In other words, they are acting the way they are, behaving the way they are, simply because of the situation they find themselves in, and uh, as opposed to just having some sort of character or personality flaw. Uh, I learned that very early in my first semester of my first teaching job, which uh, I was, I guess, mid 20s, and the finally got into a career, and it was going to be as a teacher. And the only job I could find at the time was at a what was called a pre-vocational school, which is basically a school for kids that were having issues. They were all on either probation with the school system or probation for with the court system, or both, and they were all middle school age. And so going through everything else they were going through as middle schoolers, they also had these issues that had gotten them into probation. And there was one real pretty eighth grader. She was just a kind of, the room lit up when she walked in the room, except she required, as a teacher, she required your constant attention. I mean, I had 15, 16 of these kids in the room for a 3 hour session in the morning, and a different 15 or 16 for a 3 hour session in the afternoon, and was trying to teach them, employment skills and work habits, and things like that. Somehow around notions of marketing and business and that sort of stuff, because I guess the school system figured that maybe their best shot was to end up, you know, as a retail clerk someplace or something. But these kids were, they had a hard time, and they had a lot of hard history behind them. But anyhow, this one real bright, bubbly girl, but she could go from being bright and bubbly to total thunderstorm in a heartbeat. One of those things. And so you had to kind of play total attention to her. Um, I don't think it was. I think it was more related to the treatment she had gotten as a child, because she was there after having uh, basically assaulted a couple of adults at home with a baseball bat. And turns out that once it was all unsorted a bit later, she had also been abused and sexually abused. And so there were lots of issues this girl had. But she required constant attention. You had to be focused on her. You had to be, you had to have her in the corner of your eye all the time, just to make sure that, nothing was going to blow up. And one day, something happened at the other side of the room, and there were two kids, two guys about ready to get into, they were doing all the huffing and puffing, and I'm gonna knock your head off and blah 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 blah. And they never do. It's when they're blowing smoke like that, you kind of just want to break it up because you don't want other kids to get involved. But those two are probably not going to do anything. And then suddenly, as I was kind of breaking them up, I heard a commotion behind me, and this young girl had jumped up on top of my desk, and she said, "You're not paying attention to me. You need to pay attention to me." And I know how I'll make you pay attention to me. I'll just take all my clothes off. In methods class, they don't really get into that. It's not one of those classroom discipline methods class things that you kind of get into. And so, I didn't know what the devil I was going to do, because, if I went and grabbed her, that's going to create a confrontation. If I didn't, whatever. And so I was literally almost paralyzed. And the only thing I could, I didn't even think about what I was doing. I just started laughing, because it was just such an absurd situation that, and this was like my second week, teaching, and this thing happens, and I'm going like, oh, geez, what do I do now? And the only thing, I just started laughing. Well, it was the worst thing I could do, because she jumped off the desk and ran out of the room, half clothed and all that sort of stuff. And principal came running down the hall. Want to know what was going on? I said, well, it didn't quite turn out the way I'd hoped it had, but you need to find so and so, because she's really kind of gone off the end. And he said, well, you just get all these kids quieting down. You get control here, and I'll get her. And he got her, but she was beating him on the back of the head and on his back like the devil, as he was trying to kind of almost carry her back toward the office. And so we had to call the school psychologist, which we had one on staff in that building, because these were kids that they knew could blow up in a heartbeat. And so she went someplace else. She didn't come back to school. They committed her until they could kind of see if they could get some clarity. And that's when we found out about all the abuse and misuse that she had gone through as a child. And so it was, that was, you could have attributed lots of things there, but it turns out it wasn't really sort of any sort of mental failing. She was just angry, thoroughly angry, and trying to keep a sunny disposition. And if you couldn't help her to keep a sunny disposition, then the storms rolled in. So it's it was one of those things about you could have thought it was about her mental condition, or some sort of problem she had mentally or whatever, but it wasn't. It was purely situational. And she did okay. I think I encountered her a few years later in a store, and she tried really not to tried not to pay any attention to me, but then she finally did. She said, "Hey, I'm so and so," and I'm going, "Hey, yeah, I see you're doing okay now, doing a little better." And she's, she was still messed up, but I mean, she could take care of herself a bit, and so you kind of hope everything turned out okay. But it was, those are the things that you never think that situation is ever going to occur, and so you don't know. That made me rethink all those kids in that class. And because of that, I went and tried to find, out as much as I can about all of them. And it helped a lot. It helped a lot with dealing with the kids in the class, in the two classes. But it was really a lesson for me. But attribution is really a dangerous thing to fall into, because it is normally mostly more situational than it is dispositional. Anyhow, that was what was on the back of my note sheet about that. So I would want to throw that in there. So, and I still don't think it's actually covered in methods classes, but uh, for the one time that it occurred to me, it probably should have been, just in case it comes up. Um, so that's kind of the end of that stuff. Let's talk about let's get into this idea of strategic planning. I had one of the things that you were kind of asked to do if you had a chance to do this week was to look at, see if you could locate a environmental scan or any related to your school. And so I'd like to talk about that in a minute, but first I want to put that in context. Why an environmental scan? Primarily because you have to know where you're at. As I mentioned earlier, you have to know the circumstances and the situations within the school, the data that provides you information about that before you can figure out, where do you need to go? What do we want to look like in 2 years or 3 years? Because when you get around to talking about a mission statement, which is the really beginning of the strategic planning model, when you think about that mission statement, you have to know what course correction you're trying to make. Is it related to behavior? Is it related to culture? Is it related to staffing and professional development? What's it related to? What is the, because your mission has to be broad enough to encompass the issues that are occurring within the building, but narrow enough so that you're not trying to chart such a wide course that you don't get anything done. I mean, if you just say, we want to make this a better place, okay, well, wonderful. Let's put an ice cream machine in the hallway. And, there's lots of ways to make it a better place. But, that's too broad. And so we have to think about the focus of the mission statement. And in order to do that, you have to know where you are. And that's the environmental scan piece. Did the environmental scans that you looked at, did they surprise you? Or were they pretty much what you thought they would be? Give me an example, someone.
I'll give you an example at my school because I'm new at my school. This year, I was actually surprised by the data that it's not very good. I mean, it's kind of like I looked at it and thought, wow, this is worse than I thought, kind of thing. I mean, so it's sort of a school in decline.
And what do you think the circumstance was? You were sort of naive to that, just being fairly new there, or?
I think I was reallocated to this school as an ESL teacher, and I think I got there and I've been, kind of holding on to my bootstraps, trying to, get grad school.
Yeah.
And like I knew where I came from was pretty great, and I knew where I was going was kind of rough. Like I knew that I knew I had switched from two different kinds of places, but I really didn't know I didn't know the thick of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you got two ways to go there. One is you're going to look at it and you're going to think, oh, this is a lot better than I thought. Or you're going to look at it and you're going to think, geez, what am I doing here? And either way, I mean, it's kind of a surprise. Anybody have the other experience? Anybody thought it would be that it was better than you thought it would be when you looked at the data? So in general, mostly the data was painted a picture that you thought would be there, or maybe a little bit worse than you thought would be there. Yeah. Yeah, it's the environmental scan. It really depends on the strength, on the quality of the data too. I mean, because when you look at the reporting data, that's a lot of the data you'll get is the data that people have to report, that schools and school divisions have to report, um, either to accrediting agencies or to the state or to uh, the feds or wherever the report goes ends up at. But most of the data, reporting data, is reasonably fixed in terms of the metrics and the type of data you have to collect and how you have to collect it and all that sort of stuff. Though some of the data requires a little bit of interpretation. And so there is a possibility that schools can paint a better picture, sorry about the accent, a better picture of what's happening than truly is. Not many schools are going to paint a worse picture than is truly happening. But there is some data that you have some interpretive, uh, a little bit more subjective in how it's scaled and things like that. One of the worst pieces of data is discipline referrals. I mean, even though you have kind of common type definitions, the application of the definitions is very much a situational thing. And so, I've been in schools that have looked on paper like, I mean, this is probably, gangs running rampant through the schools. And you get into the school and it's really fairly well behaved. And, they're using the same metrics, the same definitions that other schools are using them. They're just being a bit more stringent about applying them. And it's also why I don't like the multi-tiered stuff, because there's a great deal of variability within the multi-tiered stuff from school to school, because each school is encouraged to think of their own definitions and their own agreed ways of doing things. And so the multi-tiered stuff tends to be, can be skewed a bit one way or the other. And so there are, and other bits and pieces of data, test scores, things like that. Those are pretty firm. Reading scores are reasonably firm. But there are other things that are how do we say, have a little fudge factor available in them. And some schools are a bit more pliant with how they apply those things. So, when you look at the environmental scan data, realize you have to look at the data points. You have to look at the elements of the data points. I mean, what's in that data point? And, what are the situational sort of aspects within it? And kind of dig, just slightly deeper, because, obviously, Laura, you saw something that was a little worse than you thought it might be, or maybe you, in your worst days, thought it might be that way, and it turned out on your best days it was that way. But it's one of those circumstances where that's much more unlikely than the other. I mean, what that tells me is that school is pretty straight up on its data points, on most of its data points.
You mean my school?
Yeah, because
Yes.
you don't try not to paint a worse picture. And so, I mean, your flaw is always on the positive side. Now, the bad parts are, it may be a little bit worse than the picture that's being painted, but that's, I don't want you to get you running for the exits quite yet. But, It is, the data points do have some wiggle room in them. And I've done too many school audits where I've gone in and done those, and then looked at their data and looked at my data and find that there's, a bit of a gap between them. And
So if I could add one component to sharing my data was that where what I ended up doing is I spent some time kind of comparing my old school,
mhm,
which is a very similar population to the school that I got moved to. And so you asked, I mean, I kind of expected them to be very similar because they're very similar populations.
right.
But I think what I really saw was the contrast between a successful school and a declining school. And I think it was really eye-opening for me.
And then you have to begin to think about what are the factors that differ between the two schools. What is it? Leadership? Is it the community? The trends within the community? Is it? I mean, you kind of have to look a little bit deeper just to see, what is it between the two schools. If they're similar in population and makeup.
Well, I will share with you, I did look at some things because I was trying to figure out my old school that's so successful. The principal has been there for 16 years and she has this really great sense of openness and has really built this organization. She somehow got funded for a new building over the 16 years. And she also, and I can't figure out how she does this, but her per pupil dollar amount is significantly higher. And that's a question I think one day I'm going to have to ask her how she gets that much
That's
money.
money. Yeah. Yeah.
How does she is really well funded is a big deal.
I imagine she's pretty well connected in the community too. I mean, she's considered one of those people in the community that everybody kind of looks up to, and you want her on the fundraising board for the United Way and stuff like that because she's kind of has a, a popular, kind of a respect within the community. That translates to dollars because she can't generate the dollars, but if the community feels that she can, plant the seeds and have the community think that this needs to be done, this needs to happen, this needs to happen, that the community will generate the dollars because they'll put the pressure on, the supervisors or the city council or whatever, because they are the ones that have the ability to press, not the principals and superintendents. It's the community. And successful principals, successful superintendents have those tendrils out in the community. They have connections to the community, and so they less successful ones come in and they do their job and they go home, and they don't do the level of community outreach or the level of community connections that others do. And if you're looking for money or looking for resources or looking for support, you're not going to get it at the central office. You're going to get it in the community, not directly, but they're the ones that are going to, turn the screws to get it done. And that's just the nature of it. I was called in to do a school audit, 20, 25 years ago, I guess. And it was a little school division that had, I only had like 1,500 students altogether. And they had one high school and one elementary school. And the high school was junior high and high school all in one building. And the elementary school was right across the road. And it was the town of West Point in Virginia, which not like the West Point in New York, but West Point in Virginia. It did sit on the river, but it was the main industry in West Point was two large paper mills right on the river there. And if you could tolerate the smell, it was a wonderful place to live because, I mean, it was a small little insulated town. It had, nice old downtown area, and they were even fixing up stuff back then, 20, 25 years ago. I imagine it's a really nice town. But the paper mills were the driving force in the town, and they provided most of the tax base for the town. And so the schools kind of got everything they wanted. And I was in there doing an audit related to the school programs and what mix of programs they needed to have and how they needed to, what programs they were missing in terms of the business community and the employment picture within the area. And I, collected all that data, and then I had I went in to do my interviews, and I was going to interview the superintendent and the principals, two principals, and then some of the community members. And so I was interviewing the elementary principal, and I was, we were talking, I was going through my questions and kind of probing, get a little bit more out of her and a little bit more about this, that, and the other. And, there was a knock on the door, and it was the secretary, and she said, "Mr. So-and-so's out here." And the principal started to get up, and she said, "I'll just be a minute." Well, he walked on in, and, he tossed an envelope on top of her desk and said, "I hope you can find good use for that." And wished her a good day. And, they obviously knew each other and all that sort of stuff. And so, I was looking at her kind of strangely, and she said, "Oh, okay." And so she opened the envelope up, and it was cash. And there was a little slip in front of it, and there was $2,300 in the envelope. And she closed it up, and she dropped it in a little strong box in her drawer. And she said, that was from the Rotary Club last night. That every time they have, the Rotary Club members and the Lions Club members, they all come in and they talk to the different principals and find out what they, or what do they need that's not being covered in the budget, or it's not being, little add-ons to the school and special things for students, student events and things like that. And she said, on an average month, we have about, $4,000 to $5,000 in cash after the Lions Club and the Rotary Club meetings. And I'm going, okay, that's a little unusual. I know that happens. I know that, it's kind of like, the PTA raising money for things, PTSA or whatever. But the Rotary and the Lions, I mean, these guys are business guys, they're accountants, they keep track of it. They know what money is spent. They want to know where it was spent. She said they always want to know where it was spent. And so we keep, close track of it. But, if we need something, we just put out a call for the community. And if we need $5,000 for new basketball goals in the gyms and all, we get them. The money comes. But that was that connection in that little small close-knit community. But it's a community that had a fair amount of cash on it. The tax rates were very low. You wonder how they do that. Well, they do it because they have these large industries that have such a large footprint that they pay a lot of, property taxes and sales taxes and wholesale taxes and things like that. So, but when they hired principals there, they hired people with the perspective that they needed to be involved in the community. That was maybe when you look at the job descriptions, that was right there in the first paragraph, that they wanted their leadership in the schools to be active members of the local communities, of the local business communities. And even though it's paper mills, and so you got to get used to the smell, because the smell initially is not great until you get used to it. They required all of their administrators to live in the city. and they basically gave them a house for about half price or something like that in the city. But they had to live in the city, they had to be active in the community, and because these business guys and all wanted to feel that they had a lot of control and input into the school. But it was, that was the extreme case of that. The notion of one of your schools you were at doing a whole lot better than the other school was probably the more reasonable notion of that, where she's real active in the community probably, and you're in a school where maybe they weren't as active, because that's not something you just take on. That's something it has to be internalized. You have to be, people can tell if it's fake. But it was this idea of having, being able to generate resources that maybe the other school couldn't generate probably because of leadership, as much as anything. Yeah. Other circumstances that you saw.
I know my first year teaching, I was split between two schools that were 5 minutes apart, and I was the EC resource teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the schools they had a Civitan club. And so some of the members there, some of the teachers there were like, you should join our Civitan club. And I was real new, I didn't really know what it was, but I joined the club, and it really let me know about that community and what kind of population I'm dealing with and things like that. So it was very beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
How they helped everybody in that community. And really, when that school needed something, the community was there to provide it. And that school was very low socioeconomic, low performing, but they always were provided with things they need, the basics. So I agree with the being part of that community is very important too.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's part of the price. If you want to be a school administrator or a leader in the school, you need to be connected to the community, and not just the social organizations, but also business organizations. I don't know of any Rotary Club or Ruritan Club or something like that doesn't these days actively reach out to school leaders. They want to know what's going on in the schools, and so they want to have some input on that. So they generally actively reach out. You need to reach back and make sure. Now that's changed over the last few years, because maybe 10, 20 years ago, if you were a female administrator, you wouldn't get into those organizations very easily. But today, everything's changed. And they realize, that the culture has changed, the climate's changed, the expectations have changed. And so, those availabilities are there for all administrators now, typically. And it's just a matter of answering the call, or, when the invitation comes, make sure you make sure you can find a way to get there, and, get yourself engaged, because that's a lot of generating resources right there.
I have a comment. My kids attend an independent school,
Mm-hmm.
and I worked there for 6 years. I now work in a public school and make more money and have better benefits. But that's a whole different story. But it was interesting to me working in that school and having my kids there now still. It's so much more of a business. Talking about getting resources, like they have people hired specifically at that school,
Right.
to work at the school, and to solicit businesses and parents. And I can't remember what the lady's specific title is, but like her job is to get parents to give money to the school.
It's probably advancement or something like that.
Yeah.
Resource advancement or something.
I don't know, something like that. But I just remember thinking, I don't remember if it was while I was there or while, like, one of the first years after I left. Every school needs somebody like this because every school needs
Mhm.
money. So it's just interesting, having worked in both sectors, to see how they approach things differently, especially when it comes to money.
Yeah.
Before I worked in an independent school, I assumed that teachers were paid more, and that they had more resources and all this kind of stuff. And they're not paid more. There are more resources in some situations, but in others, certainly not. But it's just interesting. It's an interesting perspective to see both sides of it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, independent schools or private schools, or whatever moniker you want to put on, they really do have an entirely different model in lots of ways, in most ways actually. And the funding piece, I think in public schools we kind of allow ourselves to be diluted by the fact that the school system and the community and the state's going to give us the money we need. Nah, that's not going to happen. There's always, if you're running a school, there's operating monies. I mean, you're going to have monies from the state and monies from the local community, and the local community monies are going to be based upon primarily real estate taxes, maybe some sales tax, things like that. But most of it is probably real estate taxes. And so, in a normal community where you have maybe 20% of the members of the community have kids in schools, you have 80% of the community that is paying real estate taxes that will go to the schools, a big chunk of it in the smaller communities, not so much in the larger communities. But as that happens, you also have to realize that there's pushback against that. And because of that, everybody in the community feels that they have some ownership of the schools, even if they don't want to have ownership of it and they don't want to be funding them. And so the dynamics of school funding. Once again, there's a whole political side to that, and that's another reason why the community outreach is so important, because you have to have people that are actually going to go into voting booths and pull a lever here and there to be able to put pressure on people to say, okay, I'm going to vote for you, but every time we get a school funding thing up, I'm going to be a bug, in your ear every time, because we need to fund schools more. And at the same time, there's somebody else that's a bug in his ear or her ear, because they are, their bottom line is getting hurt because they're having to pay higher real estate taxes. And so it becomes highly politicized. And the last person that a school board is going to listen to is a superintendent or a principal. Even though you got good numbers, you got good ideas, you got good, perspectives, the people they will listen to will be the members in the community.
And I wanted to add something, like in our school system, actually our whole county, we have this thing called K64. And our local businesses are helping to fund things in our school. Like they provided Chromebooks for all our students. So every kid has a Chromebook. They bought hotspots for the kids that don't have internet. So kids have hotspots. And it's the local businesses that are doing that. They've come in and provided new furniture for our media center. They've recovered a lot of our stuff for us. The kids' Chromebook covers tear up. They're replacing them for free for us. And the businesses are saying, we need these kids to stay in this community and work in this community. And that's why the businesses are helping us, is because they need people to work in their business.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a great partnership.
somebody's organized that. At some point in time, somebody organized that.
I think our superintendent and then the people at CVCC, our community college, got
Yeah.
together and organized this with some of the businesses.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah,
Mark
Mhm.
Story. I actually worked with a CTE teacher. His name was Mark Story. He died last year, sadly. But he came from business into the CTE world, and he saw that need, and he put a bug in Dr. Stover's ear, and it just developed from there. And it was really pretty amazing to watch, especially under the pandemic circumstances. But it was millions and millions of dollars that they raised in under 2 years.
Dr. Stover, huh?
Yes, sir.
Name sounds familiar.
I wanted to add something else too. I think as a principal, it would be a good idea to also check with your teachers, especially if they live in a community. And the reason why I say that is because I live in a community where I teach, and I know a lot of people.
Mhm.
So when the principals come, a lot of times they will be like, "Oh, I heard that you know somebody. Can you get us some furniture?"
Yeah.
Last year, I don't remember even how I got in the conversation, but the new resource officer wanted new cameras in the school. And so he needed a certain amount. And I said, well, let me ask this group of, it's like a club, men club that is in our town, and they're raising money and they just give money to whatever you need. So I contacted them and I said, we need this amount of money for these cameras, and they got it. They gave it to us. So I think also some teachers, because they have been there longer, if you ask them, they can give you ideas of who can.
Yeah.
get help.
Yeah. The only thing you have to be aware, I mean, it's kind of inefficient, and that's why this K64 works so well. It's kind of inefficient to have to go to individual businesses. If you can have an organization that has probably a steering committee or something like that attached to it. And so, you know, all these businesses come with a common goal, and that is to create a good workforce, a strong workforce. And you know, Louise, like you said, they know that this is their working base. You know, these are the people that are going to work for these businesses. These aren't the ones that necessarily, not all of these are the ones that are going to go off to college. A lot of them are going to stay right here and work in this community, or they're going to come back here and work in this community, because we tend to be very community based still. And if it's a smaller community, a little more so maybe than bigger communities. But and so businessmen, they understand that. They just don't want to be constantly bombarded by requests from this school and then this school and then this school and this school. And so if you can organize them in a way that, you know, there's a steering committee that kind of comes together and says, okay, we've got over here, they say they need this, over there, they say they need that, over here, they say need this. Is there any way that we can accommodate that? If not all of it, how much of this can we accommodate? What can we do? Who's got some, you know, surplus, this, that, or the other, or who has, you know, 2 extra of this and 3 extra of that and 10 extra of that? And you very quickly, that's easier to manage and more efficient than it is to have to go to each person themselves. I mean, one of the things that one of my jobs in the university at James Madison was, you know, when you're a department head or an acting associate dean or whatever, part of your job description is to raise funds, raise money. And so, you know, we actually worked with advancement and stuff like that, which is very much more organized. And so it's like, just like you said, Megan, like you said, there needs to be somebody that has the responsibility of doing that. Unfortunately, what we normally do is we tag it on to everybody's job description in leadership. And maybe that's not the most efficient way to do it. Actually, some of the more efficient ways to do it is to, you know, maybe farm it out and put it out in the community, or make those connections in the community. And then you have a way of you know, getting some help out there. But it is, I mean, that's one of the things that as a building administrator, you need to learn very, very, very quickly, is that a lot of your job is within the building, but some of your job's not. Some of your job's in the community. And, if you're not, if you have, don't have a real strong comfort level with reaching out like that and, going with your hat in your hand and stuff like that, then maybe that's one of those areas that you need to think about. How do you kind of strengthen yourself there to feel more comfortable about that? Because in general, I find that most businesses or most business groups or community groups are more than willing to help if they can, and to their limits. But yeah, I mean, you find these big differences. We're sort of getting off track here, and I want to get into strategic planning, but we may not get there quite tonight. But um, this is all important stuff because you have to understand the environment in which school exists. And that environmental scan is more than data, it's context. What's the context within this school in which this school exists, and what is it that they need? What's the direction we need to go in? Because as you start to think about developing, a mission statement or something like that, you have to know, what's the direction we go. You have to be, it has to be encompassing enough so that it really will encompass most of everybody in the school, if not everybody in the school. But at the same time, it's got to be narrow enough that you can have, a point to the arrow. I mean, you have to have a starting point or a thought process of where you want to go with the school. And that's the mission. Now, it may be underpinned by a vision. Maybe you have several elements to your vision statement within a school or an organization. But generally speaking, the mission statement is very clear, very concise, but provides you with a way of bringing everybody on board. And so it is, it is a little, I don't want to say nebulous, but it is couched in words that maybe are a little bit more general. But the thoughts are specific. The words may be a little bit more general. And I'll be interested in seeing what kind of mission statement you come up with. But we're going to spend more time on this. Obviously, since we're going to do the group stuff next week, asynchronously, I won't change that. I'll push some of this strategic plan stuff into the week after, because we'll be talking about the type of data that you need to collect as you begin to narrow down this school improvement idea from mission statement down to specifics. And so as we kind of move forward with that, we'll drag a couple of ideas that I was going to spend tonight with in terms of more specifics about strategic planning, and a little bit more. If you read chapter 3 out of Tracy, that's a lot of the nuts and bolts of strategic planning. That's like, here's the guide, here's sort of the guidance as to how you generate a strategic plan and what should be in there, and what are the, what is a mission statement, what is a, vision statements and things like that. And so, as opposed to droning onto the night here, it's already after 8. We'll kind of hang it up here in a second, but we will come back to that week after next. We okay with that? I mean, this is all good discussion. I think this is an important point here. This notion of resources and outreaching for resources, because in any building I've ever been in, or any situation, organization I've ever been in charge of or whatever, I've never had too much resources. I've always had a longer wish list than a resource list. And so that's, that's the way you have to kind of run a organization. You always have need. Now, some of it's maybe longer term need, and we don't need it right now, but it'd be nice to have. But you always have need, but you never have enough resource for all the need. And so the resource notion is a big part of that. As a principal, you might like to eat all your meals in the lunchroom or cafeteria or whatever. I always used to, when I was working in a school building, I always used to eat my meals downtown. So that, as a teacher, and I was a business teacher, business and marketing teacher. As a business and marketing teacher, I could always use more support from downtown businesses and things like that. And so I was always, I tried to go down there and get lunch at least a couple of times a week, if not more than that, because you would meet people in the drugstore, coffee shop thing, or today I guess it would be the coffee shop downtown or the little diner or whatever, but back in those days it was the food counter at the drugstores and things like that all the business guys went to. But you get yourself known, and that's it's easier to ask somebody for something if they know who you are. So, and believe it or not, I was a whiz kid at that. I always could go find some money someplace. Just a matter of, it's like what's the line? If you ask for enough dates, eventually somebody will say yes. And that was what I used in asking for resources in the community. If I asked for enough money from different places, eventually I would get enough money to do what needed to be done. But it was, that's the nature of being an administrator in a building. Even take that to another level. You're going to have to go get resources, and this is a bit more than Girl Scout cookie money. This is a little bit more. All right, folks, I know I got off track. I apologize. Not really, but I do apologize. I think it was a good discussion, and I think we'll revisit it if you want to at some point down the road, but I'll try to get back to focus. And I got 2 weeks to get focused. I could probably get focused in 2 weeks, and we'll get back on top of this. Any questions or comments, thoughts? Nope. All right, people, do some reading and get yourself organized next week for the groups. I could organize all that for you, but that wouldn't be much of a learning experience. Get these groups organized and get them functioning, and then we'll see where we go.
Dr. Bowles, can I ask you something? So when we work on the groups, are we just choosing one school?
Yes.
Okay.
After you decide as a group.
Okay.
After you decide as a group, I'm assuming that you will probably all come to the group with, a school in mind. And however you winnow that down, that's kind of up to the group, whether you want to draw straws or you come to a consensus that there's one that you really need to look at. I'm not a big one of votes, but of course you only have 4, so you're probably going to be 2-2 anytime you vote on anything. So however you choose is up to y'all. You just it has to be a consensus once you choose.
Thank you.
Negotiate, compromise, learn these skills. Anything else? All right, folks. Go get some rest. Stay safe. Speak to your family if they're around. I think one's right there, right, Megan? There's the family right there. Yeah. Hey, okay. Yeah, I see you now. Can't stay too, and there's puppy. Yeah, okay. Go have a life. Enjoy it. Get these groups organized. I'll see you in 2 weeks, and look forward to your first sort of reflection pieces showing up by the 19th. I'll check those links to make sure I've got the links to pop them up in. I didn't check those the other day. I'll have to check that to make sure they're live, but I'll get those up. All right, folks, have a good one, and I will see you in 2 weeks.
Bye. Have a good night.